Hey everyone, welcome to this guide by Built by Bands. Today we're going to cover the deadlift. So this lift is really awesome. It's a great movement that incorporates pretty much your entire body, and as a result it triggers a lot of growth just all over. The primary muscle groups for this are going to be your hamstrings, your glutes, a little bit of your hips, and your posterior chain here in your lower back. The primary muscle group that you're using to move the weight or the tension is your glutes and your hamstrings. Your back is there just to hold things solid in that neutral spine position that we talk about so often. And so that's actually kind of the first misconception a lot of people have with deadlift, is they think that it's a lower back exercise. That's not really true. If you're only using your lower back to pull the weight, you're actually just going to hurt your spine. So you have to incorporate your glutes and your hamstrings into this movement to protect your body. So this is a very great lift. There's a lot of benefits to it in terms of growing muscle and building strength, but it is risky. So you have to ensure that your form is very, very perfect, or as close to perfect as you can possibly get, in order to do this safely. So let me go through a couple of differences with deadlift with X3 as opposed to a traditional, like an Olympic deadlift in the gym with a bar, as well as some things to consider and be cautious of before you even get going. So the first difference with the deadlift on the X3 is the range of motion is a lot different than an Olympic deadlift that you'd see in a gym or at like a weightlifting competition where they're trying to actually deadlift for records. Because you're not pulling a bar with plates from the ground, you're not getting into that deep squat position like you would with a typical deadlift. This is much closer to a stiff leg deadlift or a Romanian deadlift. It's kind of in between the two. It's very different with X3 compared to either of those other examples with a traditional bar and weights. So that's the first thing to understand, is that if you're an experienced lifter coming into X3 and you're new to the program, all of your knowledge is going to pay off here, but you need to rethink the range of motion and positioning for X3 in order to get the benefits of it and not hurt yourself. So one example of what I'm talking about is if you were to squat down all the way like a traditional deadlift, look how loose the band is. Okay, so you have to start much higher to have tension on the band before you even get going. So we're going to demonstrate some more further, but I wanted to highlight that right from the front, that you're not doing a traditional deadlift. Some people ask, well, am I not getting the benefit? You are getting the benefit, okay? Because with the X3, right, the range of motion is from a little below your knee to upright, okay? And because you're keeping that constant tension on both ends of the movement, you're really, really triggering the primary muscle group, and you are getting a lot of growth. Personally, I've seen a lot of transformation in myself as a result of the deadlifts, and going back to traditional weights, even with great form, my back always hurt me. I'm a pretty small guy, and I have some existing injuries from the military and sports and stuff, and so doing heavier weighted deadlifts, even though my muscles were capable of doing it, I don't know if it's my injuries or my frame or something, but I would always be in pain afterwards, in my skeletal structure, not the muscles. But I don't experience that with X3. So there is a lot of value in the deadlift, and it's one of the benefits of this system. Obviously, if you're trying to compete and go into like an Olympic weightlifting competition for the deadlift, you're going to probably still need to go perfect your craft there. For those of you like me who are just trying to be in shape and get stronger and look better and all that kind of stuff, this is all you're going to need. So let's go into things to consider. So the first is your grip, okay? This exercise is a lot of tension, okay, because you're doubling the band, and you're moving it quite a far distance up, so that the tension is really increasing pretty significantly as you go through the movement. So obviously your grip is going to be taxed very hard as you're holding onto the bar. If you are failing really quickly with grip, So I got the black band, you know, queued up here. Let's say you can only get like 8 reps because your grip is failing you. You either need to augment your grip with some straps or something, or you need to drop a band and build your grip up further. So I have a separate video. I will link that here somewhere for you to look at, or at the end it'll be linked here in terms of accessories and when you should or shouldn't use them. But just keep in mind that your grip is going to get taxed very heavily on this movement, and so it's normal for it to start getting a little shaky. So that leads to the second thing to consider is if you're not confident in your ability to hold on to the bar and not drop it on your feet, which can happen, and people have posted that, and it looks very painful. I've never done it myself, but I don't really want to. There's several things you can do. One is you could like string up a foam roller on your plate here in between your legs, so that way if the worst happens and you do drop the bar unexpectedly, it's not smashing your toes and potentially breaking them. I wear shoes when I deadlift just because should the worst ever happen, I don't want it to be on my bare foot. I'd rather have at least a little bit of cushion. That's another point. When you're wearing shoes, they need to be flat. You don't want a big arced type of shoe or something really squishy. You want it to be solid and flat, because that's going to really help your body stay in that positive position. If you've got like squishy running shoes, you know, with a lot of cushion, it just adds instability and it makes it a little bit more dangerous. The next thing to consider is, because of the amount of tension we're putting on the platform, is your balance and positioning on the platform. So for me, when I do this, in order for my foot and most of my heel to be positioned over where the band is actually pulling upwards on the platform, my toes hang off the end, okay? If I did it so that my toes were like perfectly centered, the weight now, the way I'm pulling on the platform, is actually not even with where my weight is pushing down, so the tendency to tip is a lot higher, okay? So you need to be very aware of this. So what you can do with your first rep is just kind of go slowly to see how, you know, is it balanced? Okay, good. And then maybe take a quick rest and then go from there. But if you're not balanced well and you try a band that's too heavy for you, you might lose your balance and launch the plate. You know, I think this thing, I forget the max tension on the black band, it's like 300 something pounds maybe. For a guy my height, that's gonna launch that sucker straight through the roof. So please be careful when you're doing this to keep your balance. If you're concerned about your ability to balance well, start with a lower band, get very familiar with the exercise, with the form, and then progress up from there, okay? It's basically with every lift with X3, it's always a good idea, if you're not certain or unsure of yourself, to just drop bands, master the form, and then you'll be able to build really quickly from there, okay? Now let's get into the deadlift itself. The form you need to go through and how you do with X3. So neutral spine is super important, okay? That's what we're talking about here. The base of my neck, all the way to my pelvis. My spine isn't arched or in either direction. My head isn't arced up. I'm not turning side to side. It's essentially in one perfectly straight line, okay? So to be in that position, you're gonna look a little bit different depending on your height and your size and all that kind of stuff, but your spine should be in a generally straight line from your neck to your pelvis, okay? And the reason that's important is if it's not, the risk of actually hurting your spine increases more and more the more out of position you are. So this is where your lower back comes into play, is to hold that position. Your muscles are flexing, but they're not pulling the bar up. They're just holding your spine stiff, okay? If that makes sense. You're kind of just trying to stay solid. The point of, you know, where we're moving is in our hips, okay? You're hinging your hips up and down. And the way that you accomplish that is to pinch a dime. So forgive me for this phrase, but it really works for people to remember, is imagine putting a dime in between your butt cheeks, and you're trying to squeeze that dime so that it doesn't fall out of your cheeks, okay? So if you think about that, in position, even with no bar, if I just squeeze my cheeks, I start to stand up. Okay, so you can go try this for yourself. Just flex your butt as hard as you can, and you should start to feel your hips come up, okay? So that's a very key thing. The bar stays very close to your legs. it's basically going straight up, okay? It's not coming out, and you're not like leaning back or anything like that. The bar path, because you flex your glutes, is just gonna pull it straight up like that, okay? And so then to release, you just slowly release your glutes and go back down, okay? So the primary motion is in your glutes. That's the primary muscles doing the work here. And then your hamstrings obviously get worked too because they're helping stabilize your glutes through the motion. So look in a mirror or something, film yourself to see if you're doing that correctly, or ask someone else to watch you and tell you. You should have neutral spine, and your hips should be the thing that's moving forward and back slowly, under control, not the bar, not your back, and that kind of stuff. And then think about pinch the dime. If you constantly think that mantra as you're doing this, if you're unfamiliar with it, it will really help you activate the correct muscle groups to go through the lift safely. And then with X3, like I said, you don't want to drop the tension on either end of the movement. So when you go down, you want to make sure that it's not so low that the band gets slack. You want to keep the tension. Okay, so as you're getting comfortable with this, just go down slowly and really find that point for you. For me, it's like just a little bit below my knees. It's not very far. And then from there, I'm not like jerking the bar up. I'm squeezing very hard with my glutes and then holding it and then going back down, okay? And then don't like overextend as you do this, okay? If you go too explosively, you might overextend and you could potentially hurt your back. So just be careful with that. And then the final thing to consider is your shoulder position, okay? So it's subtle, but it makes a humongous difference. So if I try and pull with my shoulders forward here, okay, my spine is gonna naturally want to curve forward. So you have to engage your shoulders back, okay? That helps flex everything correctly. You gotta keep them in place. And then pull with the glutes. And very slowly let it down. Okay, that's my point right there, just below my knee for my height. Everything's flexed, shoulders are still engaged. Glutes back up. And then release the glutes slowly, okay? So you have to engage your shoulders. If you don't, like I said, you're naturally gonna wanna hinge in the middle of your back as opposed to with your hips. So you have to roll the shoulders back and flex. So you're pinching up in here, the muscle groups together. Your lower back holds your spine in place, and the combination of the two allows you to hinge at your hips. And then that way, you use your glutes and your hamstrings, and you protect your spine from injury. So let me do a couple reps at just typical speed that I do, just so you have the visual. And that's pretty much it for the deadlift. All right, so like I said, I make sure my foot positioning is in a good spot. Solid grip on the bar. I make sure the tension is equal on both sides. It's not crooked. You want it to be nice and even. Okay, now my lower back is engaged, my glutes are already kind of flexed. Now I roll the shoulders back. Deep breath, just like on squats. Flex the glutes and back down. Okay. So I know the range of motion is a lot different than typical weights. I promise you, it's very effective, okay? You are going to build your posterior chain and your glutes and your hamstrings. It's highly effective, and if you keep your form well, like I've shown, you'll really be able to push yourself in ways that's a lot harder with an Olympic bar. So for example, I'm able to do this with the Elite Band. I use straps like I talked about in my other video, but I'm able to get 20 plus reps under control, which is pushing close to 600 pounds of tension at the top. And it's about 300, 250 at the bottom. So that's a lot of tension on I weigh about 160. I'm able to unlock a lot of potential in my body because of the variable resistance. Even though it's a more reduced range of motion from Olympic lifts. So it is effective, it does work for you if you do it correctly. The deadlift is a great one to not do the reps too fast. It's a safety thing, but you'll actually get a lot more benefit out of the lift. The last thing I'd like to say too is, personally, this is just my personal opinion, I don't think it's a good idea to do partial reps with the deadlift. There's just, the way you fatigue with the deadlift becomes really dangerous, because as you get too tired to hold your shoulders back and keep flexing your lower back correctly to hold your spine in position, you naturally want to hunch. And if you're hunched even just a little bit and you really go for it when you're tired, like I said, you hinge in your spine as opposed to the hips, and you can really hurt yourself. So this is the one lift I do not do partial reps. On basically everything else, I do as many as I can. Squats is another one where I push myself so hard that I get like 2 partial reps and I'm toast. Curls, I'm able to get like 15, 20 sometimes. It just depends. But deadlift, I don't mess with it. When I get to that point where I'll try it with good form, and if I can't even get it like barely over my knee, I just stop because I don't want to hurt myself. So that's essentially the deadlift with X3. I love this exercise, and I really love the way it works with X3 because, like I mentioned before, I cannot do this as an Olympic bar without pain, but I have no pain when I do it with this system. So it's clearly working for me. I hope it works for you too. If you have questions, you can reach out to me directly here on YouTube, or look me up in the users group and message me over Facebook. I'm happy to try and help you out, and I'm sure the rest of the group would too. Thanks for viewing. If you want to subscribe, please do so. I'll have a link on one of these sides here, and then I will also post the link here to the discussion about straps and if you should use them and when you should use them. All right, thanks and take care.